monosaccharide sugar. You're sweeter than a woman's kiss.
So if you were not able to read what he said, mainly everything translated, the big question is how should we present those movies? And these guys are gonna tell us in 1 minute. What? Hold on, I got it, promise I got it.
No problem.
Sign in later. You. You stop. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. So that was completely unreadable. But it was one of those things when you realize you're giving a Star Wars talk, you have to start with an opening crawl. So, done. So yeah, we're talking about if you are an existing Star Wars fan and you're ramping up for the new movie and you want to introduce new fans, and in particular young fans, to Star Wars, what's the best way to present the movies? Because if you've ever visited the internet, you know there's lots of opinions about how to tell these stories. So we have some thoughts.
Okay. All right. So here's one of the first options, kind of the most obvious, I think. Well, not the most obvious, but one of the more obvious. Watching the films in the order in which they happen, right? As in chronologically in the world of Star Wars, this is how they happen. So starting with episode 1, going up through episode 6, starting with Anakin being a small child and going all the way through the victory of the Rebels.
Right, which puts it in the fairly obvious, just episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. In the order that they are numbered.
So there's good, there's bad to this.
Yeah, we're looking for some advantages of doing it this way, keeping in mind that we grew up in the 80s and we watched the original trilogy first, as most of you probably did. Still, if you do watch them in story order, you get some things out of it. You get to see the way that the sort of big political picture of the Galactic Senate becoming the Galactic Empire, which is kind of fun. The movies do get better as you go if you watch them in this order, going from episode 1 through 6. Then generally quality improves.
So if you're into delayed gratification, starting off with the least good and then going to the most good, rewarding yourself.
Yeah,
this might be the way to go.
There's that. Disadvantages. This is one that has always bothered me, is that if you watch it 1 through 6, what it tries to do, and what I think, maybe Lucas intended, was to frame the entire saga as being Anakin's story, right? It starts from him as a child, all the way through falling and becoming Darth Vader, and then ultimately being redeemed at the end. And that, to my mind, works to a point, but it's a less cohesive story than saying, here's episodes 4 through 6, Luke's story, beginning, middle, and end. It feels a little more cohesive that way. Particularly, and we don't have time to do this, but particularly if you look at the influences on the original trilogy of Joseph Campbell and the hero cycle, and that kind of archetypal journey that Luke goes through, Anakin's story doesn't fit that pattern really well, because it's not the story of a rise of a hero; it's the story of a fall of a hero, which is a different beast altogether. So that's a kind of downside of this telling in story order.
Another disadvantage, it starts out with the worst movie of the series first, which might turn away potential fans. And, you know, this was kind of just a theory of mine because I'm not particularly as much of a fan as of the first and second movie. But it was reaffirmed for me the other day when I told my high school ESL students about that I was going to do this, and they said, Star Wars, miss? And I said, what, you don't like Star Wars? And they said, no. Oh, no, I don't like Star Wars. And I said, which ones have you seen? And they said, 1 and 2, episodes 1 and 2, and they don't like Star Wars.
And they stopped.
And they stopped because they don't like Star Wars. And so starting with 1 and 2, now they're not in. They didn't have the buy-in now, and they're not going to ever get to the stories that we hold so culturally important.
Yeah, I'm only gonna watch that kid's pod race for so many minutes before I'm not interested anymore. And then, of course, to my mind, the biggest disadvantage is the end of Empire Strikes Back when it's revealed, spoiler alert.
Spoiler
Alert from the 80s, Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, and...
No!
You mean... And that's completely blown several movies in advance of that. And the reason that's, not only is that one kind of a fun story point, but that was the cultural moment for many of us in the 80s. That was a thing that we all remember. Even non-Star Wars fans were shocked at that. And that's lost by giving away that, you know, you can watch videos. We have a video of our own daughter reacting to that news for the first time, and it's awesome. And if we had shown it in story order, we would have lost that moment. So, second option.
Okay, release order. So this would be the second most obvious, or maybe tied for the most obvious. Watching it 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. So it's the original movies, and and then the next 3 movies after that. So there's several benefits to that. The first one being, I think. Yeah, this is the order that we watch them in. So, of course, that's how I want to show people, because I know what it's like to experience the movies like that. I want my children to experience the movies like that, because that's the way I was excited about it.
And that does sound selfish, but and I guess it is, but you're trying to share a cultural thing with someone else. And of course, you want to share it in the same way that you experienced it. This kind of ties with what I said earlier, but to my mind, and this is entirely opinion, the whole thing's opinion, of course, but the first trilogy being a more cohesive beginning, middle, end, whereas the Anakin story he's a little kid, he's an angsty teen from a broken home, then he's Darth Vader, and then he's just straight up evil, the bad guy for 2 movies with no real character development there.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he's redeemed. And there's just a big leap that you have to make, and just say, well, pause for two movies and trust that Vader's still a character and not just an archetypal bad guy. Whereas Luke's story, we follow him the whole way through. But this is where you end when you watch it in release order, and there's no closure whatsoever. You're ending the whole experience, this thing you're sharing with someone for the first time, assuming you've gotten through 6 movies at this point. They're going to be left with, well, now what, right? Because there's no finale to it, except what you've already watched in the original trilogy. Now they're out of order. We know how everything turns out.
So, yeah, there's nothing to find out as you're going.
Yeah, so why would you go back and watch? So here's the
one true order.
Yeah.
Take notes.
Yes.
Okay.
A New Hope, Episode 4. Empire Strikes Back. Attack of the Clones. We're jumping back in time now, so this is 4, 5. Jump back. Notice not to 1.
Flashback
to
for
2. Episode 2. Episode 3. And then complete with Episode 6. Now, yes, this is a little controversial. A little controversial. And here's the benefit.
I'll post it on Facebook.
We're not here to bash Episode 1, but it is worth bashing. And we're getting rid of it because it doesn't add anything lasting. This regardless of your opinion of the movie as its own experience, nothing that it adds has any lasting impact to the rest of the series. And
You have to see Princess
Jar Jar?
Leia with that bun deal.
Yeah, before you appreciate
a
it.
couple of minor references
Yeah, yeah.
to the original
Yeah.
trilogy, but nothing that
It's
Jar
not
Jar
essential.
doesn't matter, the pod racing doesn't matter, midichlorians don't matter, the interesting characters, Darth Maul dies, Qui-Gon dies, you know, everybody's...
And there's not reference to them except once later on, so it's not necessary. Advantages for kids: when you start with 4, 5, good and evil are clearly defined. Black and white is evil, everybody else is good. My daughter at age 3 could very clearly understand Darth Vader's bad, stormtroopers are bad, the people that are people are good, right?
People with faces are...
People with faces are good. And then the shades of gray are introduced later. So it's saying bad and good, okay, we understand that. Now let's look at this. Wait a minute. These look like the bad guys. But when you get to this episode, when you get to episode 3, these are the good guys right here. And so it introduces that more slowly so that they can have that base of this is good and this is evil, and then see what happens as it progresses and how shady that can be and how tricky it can be. How good people turn into bad people and how bad people can become good.
Yeah, morally gray is awesome, but it's confusing for kids. This way, you prep them for it. And the fact that the clone troopers look exactly like stormtroopers, they're able to work that out after a couple of movies. And then the last big advantage is the end of Empire Strikes Back. Cliffhanger in several regards, but the main one is Luke just found out Vader's his father, and he's trying to process this while he's working out how can this be true. You know, why didn't you tell me, Ben? You know, that whole certain point of view speech that'll come later. We're going to get some context for that by jumping back and getting the story of how Anakin became Vader, then jumping back and...
So basically we're doing, 4, 5 flashback to how Vader got this way, right? How Vader got this way, why Luke doesn't know, okay?
And this is something I hadn't considered until I watched it this way, that really this idea that Vader can be redeemed comes out of nowhere at the end of Jedi, right? It's just this naive hope on the part of the son. It makes sense that he would hope for that, but it's not super believable. We're given nothing in the original trilogy to think, yeah, there's some good in there.
That there was ever any good.
Right,
Yeah.
but this way we've seen the before and after, and it makes it more believable. And then at the end, the two stories converge. They come together and end at the same time, which in my mind is a nice symmetry to the
Luke's
series.
story is done and wrapped up, Vader's story is done and wrapped up at the same time.
So I'm trying to think of what you lose.
This is the one thing that's hard for me as a young child watching with my brother, wherever he is back here. The story of Luke and Leia ending up being brother and sister, that was very near and dear to me. And it changes the surprise. It doesn't get rid of it though. It changes the surprise because in episode 5, there's the reference to there is another. And then when we flash back and go to episode 2 and episode 3, at the end of episode 3, Leia has a baby and names it Luke, and another one, Padme, and has another one and names it Leia. And then your brain just all of a sudden goes, wait a minute, she just had Luke and Leia, and we didn't know that yet. So it changes it to be at the end of that movie. It gives that movie a little more strength. And then we still get to find out with Luke. We still get to kind of experience that with him. And then we get to experience it with Leia in this scene in episode 6.
Yeah, so it just adds an interesting change in what we know versus what the characters know at different points in the movie. And then I guess we'll leave it to you and open it up to questions. Are there other...
Hey, Paul.